The discipline of comparative politics traditionally teaches that each nation-state is possessed of an ideology. Allegedly, this ideology serves to aid comparative politicians' predictions of future state behavior. To quote the Derbyshire brothers' somewhat time-worn text, Political Systems of the World, identifying the ideology on which a political system is based or influenced by will help us penetrate the facade of institutions and slogans. I'm taken aback by this bald suggestion of widespread government institutional ineffectuality. Indeed, taken at face value, this statement presents all governments as no more than a mere facade covering something yet to be revealed by our authors. The discussion by the Derbyshire brothers in their following paragraphs border on pretense or pretending and fail to inspire any confidence in their alleged meaning. As a matter of fact, to treat government institutions in the way of the Derbyshire brothers, dismissing them outright for the comparative political process, is to distort deeply any potential understanding of how the state works. In my own opposing view, ideology as a comparative tool for political science is completely irrelevant. The key to understanding any government, and thus any state, is to understand how its various political, administrative, judicial, professional, and private institutions work in themselves and work together. Any ideological labels such as democratic, communist, Marxist, etc., even when mixed with institutional adjectives such as emergent, military, Islamic, liberal, are nothing more than a politician's talking point and not a true description of the methods and functions of the institution of the state in question. The key to understanding any state or any organization is to understand its lines of agreement. A line of agreement is a well-known, widely exercised, widely published explanation of how an institutional process works. These processes that survive or thrive across multiple institutions are better known as customs or customary behavior. A classic example is how a bill becomes a law. However, these lines of agreement, these processes of government exist in innumerable form from the smallest village to the largest territorial state, and in some cases beyond the territorial state. To understand or discern a government's line of agreement, you must first gain a firm understanding of the purpose and organizational design of the two institutions at either end of any line of agreement. As a rule, one document, usually but not necessarily Constitution, creates or scopes an institution, while other documents work to establish the functioning of the lines of agreement. This is reason enough to explain why we Americans refer to the first 10 amendments of our Constitution as the Bill of Rights. This unique name is a clear indication to the reader that these amendments address the lines of agreement between the government institutions established previously in the Constitution and do not in any form create a new institution of their own. It is possible with enough investigative legwork to determine how communication flows along any line of agreement. This all begs the question, why bother even mentioning ideology when we can easily trace the very footsteps of governmental communication and documentation? Indeed, the so-called unwritten Constitution must in effect be nothing more than these customary lines of agreement between and among existing government institutions. These lines of agreement are the first principles from which any understanding of a government must derive. This idea of line of agreement is a powerful concept. It provides a standardized means to interrogate and evaluate all levels of an institution. Thus, even the most seemingly insignificant institution, like, say, a completely disorganized street gang, can be understood using this idea, as can massive dual sovereignty nation states like the United States of America. Max Weber, in his lecture Politics as a Vocation, makes a grave comparative political error. Max Weber confuses hegemony with state. A state has significantly more institutional development and significantly greater number of lines of agreement. Max Weber sardonically writes, "The state is a form of human community that successfully lays claim to the monopoly of legitimate physical violence within a particular territory." Weber's definition is at best a definition of high-intensity martial law. Weber's lackluster definition seemingly reduces the state to no more than the preeminent turf gang to rule the block. We reject Weber's cynicism outright. Instead, a state should be classified by the way it chooses to arrange its lines of agreement. How do the three main branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, express themselves as institutions, and how do these institutions agree, disagree, and communicate? Can the lines of agreement function without any one individual? How do these lines of agreement function within various political and militia groups? Comparative political scientists make extensive use of the notion of agreement within their independent variables, though this is generally without the recognition of the differentiation of these variables as being executive, legislative, or judicial. At the heart of this critique of widely read political scientists like Samuel P. Huntington is that their ideas fail to make a distinction between political and coercive power. They are unable or unwilling to explain how coercive power is used and unfolded within any one regime or government, or even within non-state groups. Which institution of which branch of state power, executive, legislative, or judicial, is operating the militia that is using coercive force? This can be a delicate question. A well-functioning government of any stripe has many precise jurisdictions and many formalized or agreed-upon militias, all exercising their coercive power along a narrow line. A less well-functioning government will have an irregular arrangement of its militias, and these militias will often have overlapping and conflicting jurisdictions. I conjecture that these arrangements are unique to each country and each government or regime in that country. This conjecture allows for the classification of any government by the arrangement of its militia organization and its actual employment and use of coercive power. Good governments can exercise power without coercion. Bad governments often resort to coercion, and hegemonies do nothing but use coercion. Ideology is simply hearsay. Coercion is real. A second conjecture suggests itself at this point. I conjecture that there are many fewer arrangements that a government may take when we simply ignore the hearsay of ideology. Just because a government leader wears a military uniform doesn't necessarily mean that the government itself should be considered strictly as a military regime. A firm distinction must be made between political power and coercive power. Coercive power is readily identified by the presence of an enforcing militia, be that a recognizable military or police organization, or something more irregular or hybrid. Thus, it is possible for a quote non-military regime to be a militia regime, just as quote military regime might not be a militia regime. I can only conclude that Huntington's and other widely read authors' confused concept of comparative politics originate from their unnatural focus on the treacherous notions of political ideology while seemingly ignoring the very source of their original discomfort with the regimes they study. It's malicious. I hope this was useful.